Hey guys, tonight we ease into something wonderfully strange. The quiet, fussy, almost comically detailed etiquette rules Victorian women were expected to follow the moment their eyes opened. You're not even fully awake yet, and already an entire rulebook is silently hovering over your shoulder, judging your posture, your breathing, and probably the angle of your eyebrows. You step into this world in second person, as if you've always lived here, but very quickly, you realize you probably wouldn't survive this era without accidentally offending half the neighborhood. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you don't mind, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how this sleepy little community spans across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up in your modest but painfully tidy Victorian bedroom, and before your feet even touch the floor, you're already committing a faux pas. Did you stretch too openly? Did your nightgown slip off one shoulder? Victorian etiquette books, yes, they truly wrote entire manuals for this. Warn women not to appear disordered, even in private, in case someone enters unexpectedly. And given how often servants, siblings, and nosy aunties drift through rooms unannounced, you adjust your posture like someone preparing for a royal portrait. This is your first rule of the morning. Modesty begins before consciousness does. You sit up straight, because slouching is for people who clearly don't value their spinal health or their father's reputation. A proper Victorian woman must rise with a sense of quiet dignity, which is Victorian for, don't look like a gremlin. Even the way you place your feet on the floor matters softly, with controlled movement, as though the floorboards might be listening. This era loved quiet footsteps, almost as much as it hated women having opinions. You start dressing, and here's where the rules intensify. Dressing is not about comfort. It's about constructing a carefully engineered silhouette that silently shouts, I am respectable and therefore worthy of being ignored by scandal. You reach for your chemise first, because no garment may touch your skin without at least 2 layers of etiquette-approved fabric in between. Then the drawers, the corset, and the petticoats plural. There's always a moment, somewhere around layer 4, where you wonder whether this entire culture is just an elaborate Victorian prank. A mainstream historical fact slides back into your mind. Victorian women were expected to maintain an hourglass figure, regardless of their natural body shape, and corsets were tightened daily as part of the morning routine. Some women kept corset lacing charts to ensure their waists didn't wander. Yes, your waist could apparently wander like a poorly disciplined child. As you tighten your corset, you're reminded of that quirky tidbit. Some etiquette books warned women not to sneeze while being laced, because it might cause unexpected contortion. Translation: one badly timed sneeze, and you're folded like a Victorian travel map. Once you're fully packaged in your structural clothing, which, by the way, weighs more than some modern toddlers, you begin the ritual of the morning wash. But beware, even washing has rules. Splashing water is unladylike. Humming while grooming is juvenile. And looking at yourself too long in the mirror is vanity. So you wash in, near silence, facing your own reflection as though surprised she's still here. Historians still argue whether these rules were universally followed, or more of an upper-middle-class fantasy written by etiquette authors who were paid per sentence. Some scholars think most of these extreme guidelines were more aspirational than realistic, like the Victorian version of a fitness influencer insisting you must wake up at 4 a.m. to drink lemon water or your life doesn't count. You finish grooming and prepare to leave your room, but Victorian etiquette stops you at the door like a hall monitor armed with an 800-page rulebook. Before stepping into the hallway, you must ensure your hair is neatly arranged, even if you're only walking downstairs to breakfast. Heaven forbid you appear in front of your family with a rebellious curl. Even your eyes must behave. You practice keeping them politely soft, so no one accuses you of having too much morning enthusiasm, or worse, independent thoughts. As you walk, you're expected to maintain a gentle gliding motion, because Victorian women were supposed to appear almost weightless. There is no stomping, no shuffling, and absolutely no energetic stride, which sounds suspiciously like the way someone walks when they want to get things done. One light joke drifts through your mind. You're basically role-playing as a friendly Victorian ghost. Your second light joke arrives as you adjust your shoulders. Every posture rule makes you feel like you're preparing for a photo shoot that won't be invented for another 50 years. And the third joke sneaks in as you walk toward breakfast. Your corset is hugging you so tightly that if you dropped your morning biscuit, you genuinely couldn't bend over to retrieve it without assistance. You pause at the staircase railing, remembering one more strange rule. Never descend stairs too quickly, because quick movement was considered improperly spirited. This is the same era that thought fainting in public was acceptable, but walking briskly was scandalous. You glide downward, the entire house quiet, the morning air cool and a little judgmental. You've survived the first etiquette minefield of the day. Only 19 more to go. You slip into the dining room with the same careful grace you practiced on the stairs, and before you're even fully inside, the atmosphere tells you everything you need to know. Breakfast in a Victorian home is less family bonding time and more silent monastery with toast. This is the infamous silent breakfast, a ritual so stiff and quiet that even lifting a teacup too loudly could make someone label you boisterous. You take your seat with slow, deliberate motions, as though the chair might get offended if you place your weight on it too confidently. Victorian etiquette insists that women sit with perfect posture, shoulders gently back, chin neither lifted nor lowered too much, hands positioned gracefully in your lap before touching anything. You look like you're posing for an artist who is very late. Even your breathing feels suspiciously loud in the stillness of the room. A mainstream fact whispered in countless etiquette books. Victorians genuinely believed that too much talking at breakfast was bad for digestion. You're not sure if that's true or if someone just wanted a quiet morning, but either way, you're now part of the ritual. As you lightly pick up your spoon, you remember the rule. No clinking. The spoon must not scrape, the cup must not tap, and the toast must not crunch like you're starring in a cereal commercial. This entire meal is basically a stealth mission. You watch your family, each person performing their role with silent determination. Conversations, if absolutely necessary, should be limited to gentle comments about the weather, delivered in a low, soft voice, as though afraid to disturb the emotional ecosystem of the room. Even smiling too brightly this early is considered suspicious. You maintain what etiquette manuals call a pleasant neutrality, which sounds like something a diplomat would train for, not someone trying to eat porridge. You try your first bite, mindful of the rule that your wrists should never rest on the table. Elbows? Forbidden. Arms? Minimal movement. It's like eating inside a tiny invisible box. Halfway through the meal, a quirky Victorian tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some households insisted women lower their eyes when taking a sip of tea, because direct eye contact during sipping was considered forward. You try to picture what crime Victorian women were committing with their bold, unapologetic tea-sipping gazes, and the mental image nearly makes you snort into your cup, which would certainly shatter all breakfast laws at once. Your first light joke arrives just in time. You've never felt more like a well-trained Victorian ninja. Every movement must be silent, precise, and deadly serious. Beside your plate sits a neatly folded napkin, which must be unfolded only halfway, and only placed on your lap after everyone else has done so. Victorian life is essentially an endless game of follow the leader, except no one tells you who the leader is. You just have to sense it. Like a socially anxious Jedi. You glance toward your father, who is silently reading the newspaper. Victorian etiquette approves of this. Men can multitask over breakfast, but women should remain focused on their meal, ideally without looking like they're actually consuming anything. Eating, for women, was supposed to appear refined and delicate, which is Victorian for please don't look like a human with normal chewing patterns. Historians still argue whether these breakfast rules were followed by most families or were mainly a middle-class ideal copied from etiquette manuals trying to imitate aristocratic habits. Some scholars suggest working-class families had far more relaxed breakfasts, quicker, louder, and filled with conversation because survival didn't leave room for spoon-quieting strategies. You test the silence again, gently slicing a piece of soft egg. No one reacts. Success. Your shoulders drop 1 millimeter in relief. But then you remember another rule. Women should never appear hungry. Hunger is too physical, too human, too real. Victorian femininity demands that you eat with the impression that your body survives on moonlight and the occasional whisper of a biscuit. You take smaller bites, slow, dainty, performing nourishment rather than fully participating in it. Your second light joke sneaks in as you glance down at the tiny morsel on your fork. If you ate this slowly every day, your breakfast would still be unfinished by sunset. Across the table, your younger sibling makes the fatal error of coughing unexpectedly. A cough at breakfast is not a sin, but etiquette requires them to immediately say, "Excuse me," cover their mouth with a handkerchief, and then pretend they no longer exist. You pretend not to notice another rule. The stillness stretches as if the walls themselves are observing. You start to understand why so many Victorian women reportedly fainted. Half of them were corseted, underfed, and sleep-deprived, and the other half were simply bored to death at breakfast. Finally, the meal begins winding down, signaled by your father folding his newspaper and your mother placing her spoon perfectly parallel to her knife. That's your cue. You follow suit, remembering the rule. Never leave utensils at odd angles, because it suggests you lack refinement, or worse, geometry skills. You dab your lips with your napkin, not wipe, dab, and fold it loosely on the table. Placing a napkin too precisely implies you're showing off. Etiquette is essentially a long list of ways to avoid appearing too much of anything. Your third light joke drifts into your mind as you stand. If modern breakfasts were this silent, every cafe in the world would sound like a library during finals week. After rising slowly, you can't push your chair back too audibly. You step out of the room with the same soft-footed care you used coming down the stairs. Breakfast has ended, but the Victorian day is only beginning, and now you must face the far more treacherous etiquette battlefield outside the home. With each step, the remnants of silence cling to you like a shawl. Your body remembers the rules, the stiffness, the unspoken choreography that dictates how you hold your spoon, angle your elbows, and breathe in a room where the toast itself is quieter than you are. You survived the morning meal without scandal, but every Victorian woman knows the world outside waits with its own judgmental eyes and its own set of impossible rules. And you're about to walk right into them. You step outside into the crisp Victorian air, and instantly the world becomes a stage. Walking, something you normally do without thinking now, turns into a carefully choreographed performance with more rules than a courtroom. The moment your boots touch the pavement, society expects you to move with the calm, measured grace of someone who has never once rushed for anything in her life. Walking too fast suggests you have urgent business. Scandalous. Walking too slowly suggests laziness. Equally scandalous. Victorian etiquette demands you strike the perfect middle, the gliding pace of social acceptability. Your first few steps feel natural, but then you remember. Victorian women were instructed to walk without attracting undue notice, which essentially means you must exist gently. No bouncing, no swinging your arms, no letting your skirts swish too enthusiastically. Basically, walk as though you're carrying a very full cup of tea on your head. You straighten your posture, soften your face, and angle your chin just right. Too high is arrogant, too low is gloomy. You're a Victorian Goldilocks, hunting for the perfect chin position nobody warned you about. A carriage rattles by, and you glance up. Bad move. Eye contact with a stranger, especially a man, is considered bold, possibly flirtatious, maybe even dangerous. Victorians lived in a world where a single glance could apparently start a duel. You quickly lower your gaze and pretend to be fascinated by the pavement, which is covered in approximately 4 centuries of horse-related history. Your first light joke wanders in. You're basically trying to walk like a polite cloud. As you move down the street, you notice another rule. Avoid calling attention to the motion of your skirts. Holding them too high? Improper. Letting them drag? Also improper. Victorian etiquette books really needed a hobby. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some cities, women were advised not to look at shop windows while walking because stopping suddenly or staring too intently was considered unrefined curiosity. So you keep walking with the gentle reluctance of someone trying very hard not to be tempted by a display of ribbons. 2 elderly women pass by, and you remember the rule that you must always yield the path with a slight, polite, sideways step. Not too big, big steps are masculine. Not too small, small steps make you look indecisive. A precise sliver of space must be offered like a polite sacrifice to the sidewalk gods. Historians still argue whether most women truly followed all these rules, or whether etiquette books simply exaggerated what ideal femininity should look like. Some scholars think these guidelines were so over the top that even Victorian women rolled their eyes at them quietly. Of course, you approach the main street now, where things get even trickier. Public strolling is basically a spectator sport. Every shopkeeper, carriage driver, and passerby becomes a silent judge of your gait. You do your best impression of someone walking through a museum. Quiet, respectful, and eternally aware of being watched. Suddenly, you reach a muddy patch, a common Victorian hazard. There's a rule for this too. You can lift your skirt only with thumb and forefinger, and only enough to reveal your boots, never your ankles. Ankles, for reasons unknown to modern logic, were considered dangerously scandalous. You pinch the fabric delicately, feeling like a crane operator trying not to demolish anything. Your second light joke lands softly. If Victorian men ever saw modern beachwear, they'd probably faint so dramatically it would become a new Olympic sport. Once past the mud, you release your skirt and resume the gliding pace. But then you spot a man approaching on the right. The rule here? Move slightly to your left, but not too much, because moving too far left implies eagerness to clear his path, which might be interpreted as seeking approval. Yes, even your pathing choices must be cryptically neutral. You pass him with your eyes lowered, face serene, expression modest enough to be used in an advertisement for Victorian wallpaper. He nods without breaking pace, a safe interaction. But then you hear something catastrophic. Laughter. Two young women across the street are giggling as they walk arm in arm. An older woman scolds them, reminding them loudly that ladies must not draw attention with such behavior. Laughing too hard in public? Indecent. Enjoying yourself too visibly? Suspicious. You silently vow never to giggle again unless you're inside a soundproof Victorian-approved giggle chamber. You continue your route, heading toward a small park. But even parks have their own rulebook. You must remain on designated walkways. Avoid skipping. Yes, skip shaming was real. And never sit alone on a bench. Doing so invites gossip faster than free food invites pigeons. A mainstream fact drifts through your thoughts. Victorian city planners often designed strolling paths specifically with female etiquette in mind, encouraging predictable movement patterns so women could be seen but not, seen. Visibility without presence, presence without voice, voice without volume, the full Victorian paradox. You practice the correct arm position close to your sides, hands relaxed but never swinging. Too much arm. Movement indicates excitement, which apparently is a character flaw. Victorian etiquette could have diagnosed joy as a medical emergency. Your third light joke emerges as you maintain your stiff, gentle stride. You're walking like someone whose joints have emotional boundaries. A child running past bumps lightly into your skirt. You mustn't react too sharply. Sharp reactions are unladylike. Instead, you offer a small, understanding smile, as though this child hasn't just violated at least 12 etiquette principles by existing exuberantly. Finally, the walk comes to an end as you reach the edge of the park. You've followed the rules. You've avoided eye contact, arm movement, and public joy. You've survived the hazards of mud, men, and mirrors. You've proven you can walk without threatening the moral fabric of Victorian society. But the day is young, and the next ordeal waiting for you is far more delicate, far more coded, and far more likely to get you accidentally engaged. You haven't even made it fully down the path before Victorian etiquette smacks you with its next impossible challenge. Gloves, the tiny pieces of fabric that decide your entire social destiny. If walking was a performance, gloves are your props, your script, and your public relations department all at once. They announce who you are, what you mean, and whether you've accidentally insulted the entire neighborhood simply by adjusting your fingers. You slip your hand into the soft-fitted kid leather, and instantly your brain tries to remember the endless rules. Victorians believed a lady's hands were windows into her character, so naturally, they covered them with expensive gloves that prevented her from doing anything useful. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Proper Victorian ladies were expected to own dozens of pairs of gloves, different lengths, materials, and colors for every hour, season, and event. It is, essentially, the 19th century version of having too many phone cases. You tug the second glove on, making sure the seams lie flat. Wrinkled gloves suggest carelessness, and carelessness suggests moral decay, and moral decay suggests you'll soon be joining a traveling circus. Victorian logic doesn't always follow a straight line, but it travels quickly. You take a breath, then start walking again, your hands flawlessly gloved. Now comes the real challenge. Glove etiquette as communication. Gloves were basically Victorian texting. One gesture could send a message you didn't intend. Tap your finger wrong, and suddenly you've promised eternal love to someone you barely recognize from church. Your first light joke appears like a polite knock on your thoughts. In a world where you can accidentally flirt by adjusting your wrist, survival feels questionable. You keep your hands low and gentle. Gloves on? Good. Gloves off? Only in very specific scenarios. Gloves half off? That's where the trouble begins. As you turn onto a quieter street, you remember a quirky tidbit. Removing a glove in front of a man was considered strangely intimate, because it revealed your bare hand, the Victorian equivalent of sending a risky photo. A proper woman never removed her glove without good reason, or at least a strategically positioned screen. Naturally, this means you now become hyper-aware of your gloves. They feel like enormous neon signs flashing, "Do not interpret this." You keep your fingers perfectly still, as though you're participating in a glove peace treaty. A carriage approaches, and you instinctively raise a hand in polite acknowledgement, but no, absolutely not. Victorians considered waving improper. Instead, you may nod, slightly, from the neck, not the shoulders, because excess shoulder movement is for criminals and theatre people. Historians still argue whether Victorian glove codes were genuinely understood universally, or if only the upper classes kept track of these rules while everyone else just wore gloves to keep warm. Some believe the so-called secret language of gloves was a kind of 19th century fantasy, more gossip than reality. But Victorian society loved a good rumour, so the myth persisted. Gloves could talk even when you remain silent. As you walk, you notice a neighbour on the opposite side of the street. You recognise her from your mother's visiting cards. She gives you a polite nod. You return it, careful to avoid letting your gloved fingers twitch. One little twitch, and according to some etiquette manuals, you might accidentally send the message, "Follow me." And truly, nothing ruins a morning stroll faster than unintentionally recruiting followers. Your second light joke sneaks in as you glance at the gloves again. These things are basically emotional straitjackets for your hands. You reach the small bridge that leads toward the residential square. A breeze stirs, and you reflexively reach to adjust your bonnet ribbon. Important rule here, a lady may touch her bonnet, but only with gloved hands, and only with small, delicate motions. Anything over a gentle pat looks fidgety, and fidgeting is the gateway drug to chaos, apparently. You pat the ribbon with the solemnity of someone defusing a bomb. Ahead, two women greet each other with a polite handshake, but notice, they both keep their gloves on. Victorian etiquette insisted women shake hands only with gloved fingers, because bare hand contact was too intimate. Men could remove gloves when greeting other men, but women? Never, unless she's royalty, in which case everyone else removes their gloves for her. Gloves are basically the monarchy's version of Wi-Fi. If the Queen's glove is off, everyone connects. You continue walking, rehearsing the mental checklist. Gloves stay on outdoors. Gloves may come off at the dining table, but only at the right moment. Gloves must never be chewed. Yes, they had to clarify this. Gloves must never be used to wipe your dome. Nose, yes, they had to clarify this too. Gloves must never be thrown, dropped dramatically, or slapped against another person unless you're initiating a duel, which you are not allowed to do. You stop near a lamppost just for a moment, because women loitering risked attracting gossip. And as you pause, you suddenly recall the most precarious glove rule of all. Handing a glove to a man could be interpreted as a sign of growing affection. You tighten your grip instinctively, clutching your gloves the way modern people clutch their phones when nervous. Your third light joke floats up as you glance at your tightly held hands. Gloves were basically Victorian romance. Grenades pull the wrong finger, and everything explodes. A child runs by holding a stick, laughing loudly. His mother calls after him, and the boy trips, falling directly into the dirt. Instinctively, you step forward to help, but wait. A gloved lady must never soil her gloves unless there is mortal danger involved. And while this child's pride may be deeply wounded, his life is not. You offer a sympathetic expression but keep your gloves clean. You suddenly understand why Victorian ladies looked so composed. They were frozen by fear of touching anything. You begin walking again. Gloved hands poised exactly as etiquette prefers, relaxed, diagonal, and utterly useless. As you turn toward your next destination, you feel the weight, not just of the gloves, but of the entire Victorian performance. Every gesture says something. Every movement means something. Every mistake risks everything. But the true challenge of the morning hasn't arrived yet. The gloves are only the warm-up. Up ahead lies the most complicated, judgmental, schedule-obsessed ritual Victorian women ever faced. Calling hours. You follow the narrow street until it widens into one of those prim, overswept Victorian squares, the kind where every shrub has sharper etiquette than most people. This is the battlefield of parasol etiquette, an arena of rules so specific, you start to wonder if someone invented them out of boredom. Victorian women didn't just carry parasols, they wielded them with the delicacy of fencers, the precision of astronomers, and the unspoken hope that they might one day shade themselves without offending half the empire. The moment you unfurl your parasol, you remember the most important rule. A parasol is not a sunblock, it is a social announcement. It says, I am respectable, I am delicate, and I refuse to let the sun tattoo working-class freckles onto my face. A mainstream historical fact rises to the surface. Victorians considered pale skin the ultimate sign of gentility, proof that you had never worked outdoors. So, the parasol wasn't just for shade, it was a badge of status. A shady, collapsible status symbol. You lift it gently, not too fast. Quick motions are too theatrical, and angle it just so. The tilt has to be perfect. Too low, and you seem withdrawn. Too high, and you're practically signaling ships. You hold it like you're shielding yourself from sunlight and scandal simultaneously. Your first light joke arrives as you adjust the handle. You're basically using a tiny portable roof to protect your social reputation. The sun is warm, but your parasol creates a dreamy little patch of soft light around you. This is nice. Peaceful. Almost relaxing until you remember the rules. The shaft must remain vertical when stationary, diagonally forward when walking, and never swung like a cane. Swinging a parasol is the Victorian equivalent of skateboarding through a church. A quirky tidbit flutters in. Some etiquette manuals instructed women never to twirl their parasols, because twirling was too flirtatious. Apparently, a single rotation of painted silk could launch 1,000 misunderstandings. Imagine accidentally spinning your parasol once, and suddenly half the eligible bachelors assume you're emotionally available. You move along the path, parasol angled like a decorative compass. The trickiest part arrives as you pass another woman. This social moment is practically a dance. You must raise your parasol just slightly, not enough to look eager, just enough to avoid the dreaded parasol collision. Two silk domes clacking together is a Victorian social disaster. People would talk, they'd write letters, your mother would faint. Historians still argue whether the dramatic parasol etiquette sections in women's magazines were genuine or tongue-in-cheek satire. Some scholars think the rules were exaggerated by middle-class publications trying to mimic aristocratic behavior, while others insist women truly memorize these rituals. Either way, you're stuck performing them in broad daylight like an understudy in a moral theatre production. A breeze sweeps through, tugging gently at the parasol canopy. You respond by lowering your elbow, tightening your grip, and tilting the parasol toward the wind. You look so elegant doing it, that for a moment you understand why Victorians adored this object. It makes you feel delicate, refined, and slightly ridiculous, but in a glamorous way. Your second light joke pops in softly. You're essentially steering a Victorian satellite dish that broadcasts your respectability. You approach an area where the street narrows. A man is coming from the opposite direction, and here comes another rule. You must yield by adjusting your parasol so he doesn't have to duck. If you make a man duck, Victorian society will assume you despise him, or worse, that you believe yourselves equals. You tilt your parasol to the side, creating a polite arch of fabric. He nods and passes. You nod back, careful that your nod is acknowledgement and not invitation. Victorian nods are like emojis. You must choose the correct one for the emotional tone. Feeling slightly pleased with yourself, you continue onward. But a new hazard appears, sunlight filtering through the trees. And now you must reposition your parasol without appearing fussy. Parasols require constant tiny adjustments, but each adjustment must look like you planned it 3 days ago. You lift your wrist, tilt, step, lower, adjust, walk, tilt again. Anyone watching might assume you are navigating by celestial alignment, not trying to keep your forehead pale. Your third light joke slips in as you step around a puddle. You're doing more geometry with this parasol than you ever did in school. You pause near a bench not to sit, because sitting in public without company invites gossip, but to briefly tighten the parasol latch. And there it is, another strange rule. Never, ever close your parasol prematurely when approaching a doorway or a shop. A premature close suggests haste, and haste suggests impropriety, and impropriety suggests moral decline. Victorian logic loves a slippery slope. You move on, sun shifting behind clouds. Should you lower your parasol when the sun disappears? According to some etiquette books, absolutely not. According to others, perhaps. According to most Victorian mothers, what will people think if you don't? So you keep it up, just in case. You stroll back toward the square, feeling the weight of the rules pressing down on your shoulders and your wrist. And yet, strangely, you understand the appeal. The parasol makes you part of the scenery's soft, elegant, portable shade drifting through town like a feminine moonbeam. But as you walk, you catch sight of your next ordeal. The lined-up row of front doors along the square, each one waiting for you to perform its ritual. Calling hours. The true test. The labyrinth. Everything you've done so far, walking, gloving, parasol steering, was mere warm-up. This next part? It has the efficiency of a postal system, the emotions of a soap opera, and the politics of a small, polite war. You approach the row of orderly Victorian homes with the same nervous energy someone today might feel before entering a strict, invitation-only club. These quiet houses, polished brick, lace curtains, iron railings, aren't just residences, they're social minefields. And the ritual you're about to enter is the dreaded Victorian system of calling hours, which is somehow both a polite visit and a political campaign. The moment your boots click onto the walkway, the rules begin breathing down your neck. Calling hours typically occur between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., though some households declare slightly different times just to confuse their enemies. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Victorian women used visiting cards, essentially fancy business cards, to signal social interest, intent, hierarchy, and sometimes vengeance. You now clutch a small stack of them, decorated, embossed, and slightly smug. You stand before the first door. You'd think visiting a neighbor would be casual, but no, this is Victorian society. And even approaching the threshold is practically a military maneuver. Your first light joke arrives. Calling hours are basically Victorian Pokemon. Except instead of catching creatures, you collect social approval points. You take a breath and knock. Not too quietly, timid, not too loudly, aggressive. 3 taps, always 3. A maid opens the door, looks you over, and then glances at your card. Here's where your survival depends on millimeters. If she places your visiting card on a small tray, that means the mistress of the house might receive you. If she takes it away, she's not home, or she is home but not home for you, which is the genteel Victorian way of saying, please go away forever. Today, you're lucky the card is accepted with a nod, and you're invited inside. The drawing room awaits. Immaculate couches, porcelain, antimacassars everywhere. Victorians put little doilies on chairs because they deeply feared hair oil. The hostess smiles at you, and now the real test begins. Whether you can navigate a conversation where every sentence is a coded signal, and every polite phrase has at least 3 hidden meanings. The rulebook says a first visit must last exactly 15 minutes. Not 1 0 disinterest. Not 2 0 intrusion. 15. You mentally start the clock. You sit but remember Section 3's posture rules. They apply here too. Knees together, ankles angled, spine delicate but unbroken. Sit too comfortably, and you look common. Sit too stiffly, and you look anxious. The Victorian ideal is genteel discomfort. The hostess asks how your mother is feeling. This is not a question. This is a probe. You respond with a gentle, positive phrase, because Victorians prefer illnesses to be spoken about as indispositions. If someone has the flu, you say they are a touch under the weather. If someone has a broken leg, you say they've taken a slight unfortunate turn. If someone is on their deathbed, you say they are resting. Victorian understatement is practically an Olympic sport. A quirky tidbit shimmers in your mind. Depending on how you folded a corner of your visiting card, you could secretly indicate whether the visit was personal, friendly, congratulatory, or romantic. Folding the wrong corner could accidentally signal you're requesting courtship from someone's grandmother. Historians still argue whether these folding signals were truly used widely, or whether they were simply a magazine trend that never caught on. Some think they were real, others think only bored, etiquette-obsessed social climbers ever used them. Either way, you now worry that your visiting cards contain romantic hieroglyphs you didn't intend. The hostess pours tea. You must accept even if you hate tea. Declining tea is essentially declaring war. You lift the cup with your gloved hand, but wait. Rule check. Indoors, Gloves may be removed only after you are formally welcomed into the room and only once tea is served. You swiftly slip them off with the serenity of someone peeling open a secret identity. Your second light joke slips through your mind. This entire process feels like the world's quietest job interview. You sip tea. The conversation flows through safe Victorian topics. The weather, church attendance, the health of relatives, never described honestly, and local charity events. Attendance is socially mandatory. You must not mention politics, money, work, opinions, or most scandalous of all, anything too interesting. After exactly 15 minutes, you rise. Standing too quickly is rude. Standing too slowly is awkward. You place your empty cup down gently. You smile a soft smile. You retrieve your gloves and slip them on with the elegance of someone preparing for a duel you're not allowed to participate in. You thank the hostess and walk toward the door. The maid escorts you out, and now the most critical moment arrives, the leaving of the card. If you wish to deepen the social relationship or simply maintain it, you leave one visiting card on the tray. If the visit is meant to be purely formal or slightly distant, you leave two. If you leave none, you are essentially ghosting them Victorian style. You leave one card polite but not clingy. Back outside, the cool air greets you with relief. But calling hours are never just one visit. They are a marathon of courtesy. You've got at least 2 more homes to stop by. Your third light joke settles gently. Calling hours are like social speed dating, except you must pretend you're not speed dating. You walk toward the next door, parasol angled, gloves snug, visiting cards trembling faintly in your hand. You have survived one calling ritual, but social expectations tower overhead like lace-curtained storm clouds. Your next visit might involve trickier hierarchies, or more complex folding signals, or a hostess who serves tea too early, or a family who insists on showing you photographs of their pet bird for 20 minutes. This is historically documented. Whatever awaits, you lift your chin, soften your expression, and rehearse the polite phrases again in your mind. The Victorian world doesn't care whether you're tired or confused, or craving a loud, normal conversation. The doors are waiting, and you're expected to knock. You've barely stepped back onto the garden path when the most delicate, mind-bending etiquette challenge of the entire Victorian social universe looms before you. Conversation. Not just any conversation, Victorian lady conversation. A performance so subtly choreographed you begin to suspect the entire era functioned on polite telepathy. As you walk toward your next calling destination, you rehearse the conversational laws engraved into every etiquette manual of the time. A mainstream historical fact pops up like a nervous whisper. Victorian women were expected to be pleasant, articulate, modest, and charming without ever appearing too opinionated, witty, or knowledgeable. It's a conversational tightrope stretched across a canyon of judgment. You enter your next visit, another polished drawing room with the faint smell of lavender and polished wood, and are greeted by a hostess whose smile is warm but expertly measured. The two of you sit, and instantly the unspoken rules tighten like a corset around your vocabulary. Your hostess opens with a safe topic, the weather. Victorians adore weather talk. It's neutral, unthreatening, and carries zero risk of scandal unless you mention storms, with too much enthusiasm, which some books warn against. You respond with a calm acknowledgement of the morning chill. Then comes the real challenge. You must speak just enough to seem engaged, but not enough to seem bold. You must appear intelligent, but never superior. Interested, but never passionate. Gracefully quiet, but never dull. It's verbal yoga. Your first light joke settles into your thoughts like a quiet giggle. You're basically trying to sound like an interesting ghost. The hostess mentions her niece's upcoming wedding. This is a blessedly safe topic. Romance is allowed, but only at the most sanitized, ornamental level. You nod gently. Never lean forward. Leaning shows too much energy. A serving girl enters with a plate of biscuits. You thank her softly. The rule is to always acknowledge servants with courtesy, but never too much courtesy, because excessive kindness might look theatrical, and theatricality is suspicious. As you nibble a biscuit, small bites, only Victorian ladies must appear nourished by hope and minimal carbohydrates. Your hostess asks what books you've been enjoying. Danger. Books are tricky. You must not mention anything too political, philosophical, scientific, sensational, or heaven forbid fun. So absolutely no detective novels, no scandalous romances, no Darwin, no poetry, that might suggest you have strong emotions. Instead, you mention a botanical guide you skimmed, even though you barely understood half the plant terminology. She approves. Botany is one of the few subjects Victorian women were allowed to study without threatening the balance of the universe. A quirky tidbit pops into memory. Some etiquette books warned women not to laugh too loudly or too brightly while conversing, as loud laughter was considered a sign of weak moral character. Imagine trying not to laugh when your neighbour's poodle is wearing a tiny waistcoat, which actually happened in some fashionable circles. Your hostess moves on to travel. Easy enough. You can talk about scenery, mild discomforts, pleasant inns, but not about politics, cultural differences, or anything that suggests critical thinking. You share a polite anecdote about a country garden you visited last summer, omitting the hilarious part where a goose chased your cousin across a field. Victorian conversation cannot handle goose-related chaos. Historians still argue whether women truly policed their conversations this intensely, or whether these extreme rules reflect an idealized fantasy promoted by etiquette publishers. Some scholars believe real conversations were much livelier behind closed doors, while others insist that social gatherings were indeed polite minefields where a single misplaced comment could damage your reputation for months. Your hostess asks whether you will attend the church bazaar next week. You answer yes, softly, because participation in charity work is mandatory for maintaining status. If you say no, people will assume you hate charity, or worse, hate crocheting, which is equally suspicious. You sip your tea, maintaining the delicate angle of your wrist. Speak, sip, smile, repeat. Your second light joke arrives. Victorian small talk feels like trying to fill the silence on an elevator that lasts 3 hours. As the conversation continues, you begin noticing patterns. Your hostess never interrupts rude. She never pauses too long between replies, awkward. She never speaks too quickly, unrefined, or too slowly, a sign of possible illness. She modulates her tone with the precision of a trained diplomat. Then comes the dreaded question. Have you heard the news about the Harringtons? This is a trap. Victorian gossip etiquette is one of the strangest contradictions ever invented. You may gossip, but only about information that is already widely known. If you reveal something too new, you look untrustworthy. If you reveal something too old, you look uninformed. So you smile gently and say, I've heard some mention, but I wouldn't presume to speak on it. Perfect, non-committal, safe, elegant. You have dodged the gossip grenade. As the conversation winds down, you notice your hostess glancing toward the clock. Time's up. In Victorian calling etiquette, this is your cue to leave before your presence becomes a burden. You stand gracefully, making sure your knees don't crack audibly, a sound which Victorian etiquette has absolutely no rule for, and therefore must never occur. You thank her, retrieve your gloves, and prepare to depart. Your third light joke joins you as you exit the room. You've survived a conversation where the main goal was to avoid having a personality. Stepping back onto the street, you release a quiet breath. Conversation, in the Victorian world, is not simply chatting. It's diplomacy. Theatre, gymnastics, a delicate art form where silence is often safer than truth. But now, the next challenge awaits one even more physical, more rigid, more spine-contorting than parasols or calling cards. How to sit, stand, rise, bend, and simply exist without committing a posture-based felony. You step onto the pavement again, and your spine instantly remembers the next unwritten commandment of Victorian womanhood. You must now sit, stand, bend, step, perch, and hover with flawless, gravity-defying posture for the rest of the day. It doesn't matter whether you're in a drawing room, a carriage, a shop, or a friend's front parlour, the posture police are everywhere, and every chair is a trap. Victorian etiquette transforms your body into a constant performance. A mainstream historical fact rises to the surface like a stiff-backed reminder. Victorian women were trained from childhood to sit, with straight spines, relaxed shoulders, and hands gently resting in their laps, never on the knees, never dangling, never clasped too tightly. Even the slightest slouch hinted at moral weakness or insufficient upbringing. So naturally, you find yourself hyper-aware of every vertebra in your back. You approach a bench in the park, but sitting in public is already risky. Victorian observers may judge your posture from across the street, and one crooked angle could earn you a reputation as careless. Still, You decide to sit mostly because your corset has been squeezing you with the enthusiasm of a Victorian python. You lower yourself carefully, not slowly, dramatic, not quickly, clumsy. You bend at the knees while keeping your torso unnervingly upright. It feels like performing a squat while pretending you are not performing a squat. Your first light joke floats in. You've just invented Victorian Pilates. Congratulations. Now seated, you must maintain an angle so precise it could be measured with a protractor. Back straight, chin soft, elbows in, ankles gently crossed, not stacked, not splayed. Your feet must rest beneath your skirt like perfectly behaved little secrets. Anything more visible is a display, and displays are for shop windows, not women. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some etiquette manuals warned women not to lean back into chairs, especially upholstered ones, because it would crush their dress trim and imply a lack of discipline. So you sit perched forward, balanced, like a decorative figurine designed by someone who's never actually met a human. After a few moments, you attempt to shift your weight. Absolutely forbidden. Victorian women were expected to remain still, no fidgeting, no rocking, no bounce. Your corset groans in disapproval, but you ignore it. Your posture must outshine your comfort. Historians still argue whether most women actually maintained these impossible standards, or if etiquette books simply exaggerated expectations for middle-class readers desperate to imitate aristocratic poise. Some scholars think these manuals reflect more aspiration than reality, while others believe women truly internalized the pressure, especially in public spaces. A gust of wind rustles your skirts. You instinctively reach to smooth them, but here comes another rule. Smooth lightly, with fingertips only. Anything more forceful implies agitation. Victorian etiquette insists that even your fabric be calm. A gentleman walks by, tipping his hat politely. You respond with a gentle inclination of your head, never a full nod. A full nod is too enthusiastic, bordering on athletic. Victorian ladies must not engage in athletic nodding. Your second light joke emerges as you hold the pose. You're sitting as though a bowl of soup rests on your head, and you desperately don't want to spill it. Eventually, you decide to stand. Standing, of course, is a minefield of rules. You place your hands on the bench. No, wait, you can't place your hands on the bench. Touching surfaces publicly is unladylike. Instead, you use your core strength. What core strength? To rise smoothly using your legs alone. Once upright, you must not wobble. You must not adjust your clothing too eagerly. You must not take a deep breath of relief, even though you really, really want to. You simply float upward like a dignified balloon. Next comes walking again, but this time you're navigating a narrow walkway between two hedges. Victorian etiquette has a rule for everything, and walkway navigation is no exception. Your arms must stay gently tucked, your shoulders level, and your pace unhurried. If someone approaches, you give the polite half-step aside, a move that resembles a meek sidestep but with less drama. But then a true nightmare scenario, your glove begins to loosen. You feel it sliding half a centimeter, threatening to wrinkle. You need to fix it, but you must fix it quietly, discreetly, and with no abrupt movements. You gently pinch the fabric and adjust it while keeping your posture straight as a lamppost. Your third light joke whispers into your thoughts. With all these rules, you're basically doing stealth maintenance on your own body. You continue walking until you reach a shop's doorway. But entering a shop has posture expectations too. You step through the door without hunching, without brushing your skirt against anything, and without appearing too eager. Never appear eager in Victorian society. Eagerness is one step away from impropriety. Inside, a clerk greets you. You respond with a polite, modest smile. Victorian women's default expression. Smiling too widely is vulgar. Smiling too little is cold. You must look like someone who has just thought of a pleasant memory involving lace. You browse the shop, but even browsing has posture rules. You may not reach too high, unladylike strain, or bend too low, absolutely scandalous. So any object outside, your neutral range becomes invisible by necessity. Victorian women had to pretend anything beyond their reach didn't exist, which explains a lot about Victorian interior decoration. As you leave the shop, you pause at the entrance to ensure your posture is still perfect. Because the world is watching. And in this world, posture isn't simply posture. It's morality. It's discipline. It's social currency. It's the difference between being called graceful or questionable. But as exhausting as posture politics are, they're nothing compared to the emotional acrobatics waiting for you next. Courtship rules. The labyrinth where one misplaced glance can ruin or start your future. You continue along the street with your carefully managed posture when a sudden truth settles in your stomach like a Victorian sigh. Everything you've done so far, walking, gloving, parasol steering, calling hours, conversational acrobatics, posture gymnastics was merely training for the single most chaotic, emotionally fraught, etiquette-heavy arena of all. Victorian courtship. A labyrinth where one misplaced glance can launch a scandal, a marriage, or a decade's worth of family gossip. Possibly all three. You turn the corner and see him, a well-dressed young gentleman strolling toward you, with the polite alertness of someone who knows the rules and knows that you know the rules. Every step he takes shortens the distance between you, and you immediately run through the entire courtship rulebook in your mind like a socially anxious AI. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Victorian courtship wasn't about romance, it was about reputation, chaperones, family alliances, and well-timed glances that lasted no more than 1.5 seconds. Victorians loved timing things. A single glance too long could mean interest. 3 glances in a row, basically a proposal. Your first light joke slips in. You're about to flirt using rules stricter than a nuclear launch. Protocol. You glance away just before he's close enough to notice you noticing him. Eye contact must be fleeting, gentle, and absolutely devoid of spark, unless supervised by a chaperone. You soften your expression, tilt your parasol just slightly, not toward him. Scandalous, not away, insulting, but neutrally. Parasol neutrality is crucial. As he approaches, he performs the standard polite nod. You return a soft, modest one, careful not to smile too widely. A large smile could imply familiarity, which implies impropriety, which implies wedding invitations being printed by next Thursday. He slows his pace slightly. You keep yours steady. This is Victorian flirting. Synchronized walking and carefully timed neck movements. But then, the true terror, a chaperone appears. Your mother's friend, Mrs. Ellingham, materializes out of nowhere like a Victorian ghost. She greets you warmly, and then greets the gentleman with a polite but calculating look. Chaperones are the referees of Victorian romance, keeping score of every glance, every syllable, every molecule of impropriety floating in the air. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some etiquette books advised women never to speak to any man without a chaperone present, even if the man was their cousin. Apparently, Victorian cousins were dangerous creatures. Mrs. Ellingham asks the gentleman a safe, neutral question about the weather. He answers with equal neutrality. The conversation remains bland and breezy, like two people discussing cloud formations while secretly trying to communicate entire emotional novels through micro-expressions. Suddenly, you realize something alarming. The gentleman has paused, allowing you and Mrs. Ellingham to approach the same direction he's heading. This is the Victorian equivalent of walking together, which is loaded. You walk slowly, keeping your parasol exactly angled to shield your face without blocking your chaperone's view of your every thought. Your second light joke bubbles in. This entire situation feels like a romance scene filtered through 17 compliance officers. As you walk, the gentleman asks if you enjoyed last week's charity concert, a perfectly safe topic. You answer briefly, gracefully, making sure to reveal no strong opinions. Victorian women must not appear overly enthusiastic about music, it suggests passion. And passion is problematic. The walk continues for a few cautious steps until Mrs. Ellingham politely steers you down a different street. Translation: that's enough potential romance for today. The separation is smooth, dignified, and deeply anticlimactic. You continue alone for a moment, letting the encounter replay in your mind. Your heartbeat slows, your parasol regains its neutral tilt. But then the second half of Victorian courtship etiquette hits you like a lace-covered brick. The rules you must follow when a man isn't present. Victorian etiquette insists that a lady must never discuss a gentleman too eagerly afterward. You must not gush, not speculate, not even appear amused. Your entire romantic interest, or lack thereof, must be stored in an emotional lockbox somewhere behind your corset. If your face reveals anything, you risk gossip, which spreads faster than coal smoke. Historians still argue whether Victorian couples truly followed these strict rules or quietly found ways to break them using letters, chaperone loopholes, and accidental walks in public gardens. Some scholars believe romance thrived beneath the rules, while others think couples married barely knowing each other beyond polite weather commentary. As you walk, you reflect on the more absurd etiquettes. Ladies must not initiate conversation. Ladies must not accept small gifts unless approved by a chaperone. Ladies must not touch a man's hand unless dancing, and even then only briefly. Ladies must never walk alone with a man unless engaged. Ladies should avoid letting a mate bend. Man pick up anything they drop. It's too symbolic. Your third light joke arrives. Victorian courtship is basically speed-running emotional intimacy, using only eye contact and weather updates. You approach a small bakery window. A group of young women inside giggle over pastries while discussing gloves, suitors, and balls in the softest, most delicate conspiratorial tones. They notice you and smile knowingly, the universal Victorian expression meaning, "Yes, we saw the handsome gentleman. No, we will not speak of it out loud, but yes." You smile politely and walk on, remembering one final rule. A lady must show no urgency in matters of love. She must appear calm, thoughtful, modestly indifferent, basically a romantic Jedi. And so you continue, parasol balanced, footsteps gentle, mind full of polite chaos. Courtship may be over for the moment, but the day is far from done, because tonight you must face the most dangerous etiquette battlefield of all, the Victorian dinner table where one wrong fork can end you socially. You arrive home just in time to prepare for the single most intimidating, reputation-shaping, socially weaponized ritual of the Victorian world, the formal dinner. If courtship is a minefield, the dinner table is a full-blown battlefield lined with porcelain, silverware, and the ever-present threat of being judged by someone's great-aunt who hasn't smiled since 1834. Victorian dinners are where status is performed, alliances are tested, and etiquette becomes a full-body sport. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Victorian dinner services could include up to 20 courses, each requiring specific cutlery that must be used in exactly the right order. One wrong fork, and your social credibility evaporates like steam from a soup tureen. You change into your evening dress still hours from evening, because Victorian women live in a state of perpetual wardrobe rehearsal. Your maid helps with the stays, the hooks, the layers, and the bustle adjustment that makes you feel like a decorative architectural feature. Once ready, you descend the stairs in a state of carefully engineered elegance. By the time guests arrive, you're already exhausted, and dinner hasn't even started. Your first light joke arrives. You're about to eat food like you're defusing a bomb with cutlery. The dining room gleams with polished wood and flickering candlelight. Everyone stands around making gentle comments about the floral arrangement until the host signals it's time to enter. You walk toward your assigned seat, yes, assigned, because the seating chart is a political map drawn with surgical precision. Married couples must be separated, intellectual women placed between dull conversationalists, and no one may sit next to someone they actually like. You glide into your chair, remembering the horror, never pull it out yourself. A servant must do it. If you touch the chair, someone might faint, or worse, write about it in a letter. Once seated, you fold your napkin not fully. That signifies greed. Not carelessly. That suggests slovenliness. Just a gentle, half fold, laid across your lap like a compliant pet. The first course arrives. Soup. Soup is the silent assassin of Victorian etiquette. You must spoon it away from you, sip from the side of the spoon, never the front, and never blow on it, even if it's as hot as volcanic magma. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. Victorian etiquette books insisted that slurping, scraping, or making mouth noises were signs of poor breeding. Basically, if anyone in your family has ever made a sound while eating, your entire bloodline is suspect. You lift your spoon gently. The distance it travels must be minimal. Elbows never rise. You lean slightly toward the spoon, never bring the spoon toward you. Everything is reversed here. The conversation around the table flows with surgical delicacy. Topics must be light but not trivial, cultured but not showy, uplifting but not emotional. You participate, at just the right volume, offering a pleasant observation about the weather or a harmless anecdote that won't offend anyone with a pulse. Historians still argue whether dinner etiquette was universally enforced or mainly a middle-class obsession trying to imitate aristocrats. Some scholars think most families ate far more casually. Others believe formal dinners were so crucial that even working-class families struggled to mimic the rituals during holidays. You survive the soup. But then comes the fish course. New fork, new etiquette. You must navigate bones without visible struggle, because Victorian women should not appear to wrestle their food. Fish knives were only just becoming common, so some families still insisted on using two forks like delicate tongs. Your second light joke drifts in. You're using more utensils in 1 hour than you normally use in a month. Next comes the meat course, properly sliced, never sawed, and then the vegetables, which must be chased around the privet. Plate without stabbing. Stabbing vegetables is aggressive. Bread is torn, never cut. Butter is applied in tiny, civilized amounts because enthusiasm is uncouth. At one point, the person next to you asks whether you've read the latest serialized novel. Careful literature can be dangerous. You reply vaguely. Never reveal strong opinions. Strong opinions pair badly with lamb. Halfway through the dinner, a subtle danger arrives. The urge to rest your elbows. You resist. Posture is life. Your spine is a flagpole. Then dessert. You switch forks again, and possibly again. Dessert spoons, dessert forks, and tiny fruit knives appear like adorable weapons. You follow the lead of the hostess. She is your North Star through this sugar-coated maze. Finally, coffee arrives. You sip carefully, no sugar lumps clinking, no cream drips. You've made it this far. You're practically a Victorian dining champion. Your third light joke settles. If dinner were a sport, you'd absolutely qualify for the Etiquette Olympics. Eventually, the ladies drift to the drawing room, while the men linger behind for port and discussions you're not allowed to hear. In the drawing room, you maintain your graceful posture. Again, sip tea you don't want. Again, and engage in polite, low-volume conversation. Again, the entire experience feels like a marathon done while smiling in a corset. But as exhausting as the dinner table is, it's still only one chapter of the Victorian woman's daily endurance test. Because after dinner, when the candles dim, when the ballroom gleams next door, when the orchestra is warming up, you must prepare for the most political performance of all. The Victorian ballroom, where dance cards decide your fate. Stepping patterns can make or break you, and your ankles must remain socially invisible at all times. You leave the lingering glow of the dining room, stepping into a quieter hallway where a maid helps loosen the bodice of your dinner dress. But you're not heading to bed, not even close. The Victorian day still has layers left, quite literally. And tonight's next ordeal requires the most complicated, heavy, rule-bound garment engineering known to woman. The multi-layered Victorian wardrobe. A mainstream historical fact surfaces before you've even unclasped the first hook. Victorian women wore an average of 5-7 layers on a normal day, and far more for formal occasions. Each layer came with its own purpose, its own moral symbolism, and of course its own etiquette guidelines. You step into your room, the air thick with starch, lavender water, and the faint, persistent scent of desperation. Your maid begins undoing your gown, and you can practically hear your ribs whisper thank you. But relief is short-lived. You're simply trading one etiquette puzzle for another. Your first light joke appears softly. Changing clothes in the Victorian era feels like upgrading to a more advanced level of discomfort. Layer 1, the chemise. Layer 2, the corset. Layer 3, the corset cover. Layer 4, the petticoats. Layer 5, the bustle pad or cage. Layer 6, the underskirt. Layer 7, the overskirt. Layer 8, the bodice. Layer 9, accessories, gloves, jewelry, fan, handkerchief, and emotional resilience. Victorian fashion is less clothing and more architecture. And like all Victorian architecture, it comes with an instruction manual thicker than the telephone book. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some fashion magazines warned women not to lace their corsets alone, because doing so suggested secrecy or independence, both considered unfeminine. So you stand still while your maid tugs, cinches, and reshapes your entire torso into an hourglass silhouette that would make physics weep. Historians still argue whether corsets were universally tight-laced or whether most women wore them far more comfortably. Some scholars think only the wealthy practiced extreme lacing. Others insist the obsession with tiny waists was widespread. As your maid pulls the laces, you silently hope you're in the less extreme demographic. Once your corset is secure being Victorian for You now breathe exclusively with your upper lungs. The next layer slips over your shoulders. A starched chemisette designed to fill the neckline for modesty. Victorian etiquette has many rules, but none more absolute than the rule of modesty. If a collarbone peeked out without permission, someone would immediately fetch smelling salts. Next come the petticoats. You step into them with precision, because petticoats must not rustle too loudly. A rustling skirt suggests excitement, and excitement suggests emotional instability, which suggests you might start a scandal by accident. Your second light joke arrives. You're basically wearing an outfit engineered to prevent you from expressing any human enthusiasm. The bustle pad goes on next, exaggerating the silhouette behind you. Bustles were fashionable, but they also required impeccable balance. A misaligned bustle could make you appear uneven, which Victorian etiquette classified as visually disturbing. You shift your weight carefully, praying your bustle doesn't look like it's holding secret contraband. As your maid fastens the overskirt, you remember yet another rule. Never adjust your skirts in public unless the adjustment takes less than 1 second and involves no visible effort. Victorians wanted women to look magically tidy, as though fabric arranged itself lovingly around them. The bodice fastens with hooks so tiny they seem designed to test your patience and your maid's eyesight simultaneously. Once fastened, it restricts your range of motion to something between polite mannequin and large decorative vase. Jewelry comes last, only modest pieces before evening, but for formal events you may wear something slightly more sparkly as long as it doesn't overshadow your hostess. Overshadowing your hostess is unforgivable. So unforgivable that etiquette manuals wrote entire sections about avoiding it. Finally, you catch your reflection in the mirror. Your silhouette is elegant, your posture is impeccable, your lungs are negotiating for better working conditions, and you look exactly like what Victorian society expects: composed, poised, ornamental. But what Victorian etiquette never acknowledges is how heavy all this feels. Not just literally, though. The clothing does weigh as much as a small terrier, but emotionally. Every hook, every panel, every fold carries unspoken expectations. Be modest, be graceful, be contained, be quiet, be correct. You step back from the mirror and nearly lose your balance from the weight on your hips. A dangerous mistake falling over while dressed would be a humiliation beyond recovery. Your third light joke settles gently. Victorian fashion designers clearly confused ladylike with structurally reinforced. Your maid hands you your gloves, and as your fan, essential evening accessories. Gloves prevent unwanted touch. The fan communicates your feelings without speaking. In this society, even your accessories must follow the rules. You take a careful breath, half a breath, really. Corsets allow no more, and step toward the door. Because now that you are fully dressed, fully shaped, fully armored in silk and etiquette, you're finally ready for the Victorian nightlife, the ballroom, the dance cards, the social battlefield where grace, rhythm, and reputation collide, and where one misstep can echo for seasons. You descend the stairs like a carefully balanced chandelier, beautiful, luminous, and one unfortunate jolt away from total collapse. The ballroom awaits you downstairs, humming with anticipation, polished shoes, and 1,000 unspoken social calculations. Victorian evenings weren't merely entertainment, they were a public exam, a marriage market, a political stage, and a competitive sport all at once. Your shoes click gently on the marble floor as you enter the grand room. Chandeliers glitter overhead like operatic constellations. Silk skirts sweep across polished floors. Waistcoats gleam. Gloves flash. Violins warm up in the distance with the delicate drama of a polite thunderstorm. This is the Victorian ballroom. And nothing, absolutely nothing, has more rules. A mainstream historical fact drifts forward. Victorian dances were strictly choreographed, and women were expected to fill their dance cards, tiny booklets listing each partner for each dance of the evening. These cards were both social schedule and emotional landmine. Leave a dance slot empty? Insult. Give someone too many slots? Impropriety. Give the wrong person a slot? Scandal worthy of a serialized novel. You clutch your dance card. It's small and pretty, decorated with embossed flowers and a ribbon. Also, it feels like holding a live grenade. Your first light joke arrives. The dance card is basically Victorian, Tinder, except you can't swipe and your mom is watching. A gentleman approaches. He bows correct degree, correct timing, and asks, "May I have the pleasure of the second quadrille?" Second, not first. Perfect etiquette. First dances are reserved for socially important partners. Second dances are where polite interest begins. You nod softly, and he writes his name on your card with a tiny, perfectly respectful pencil. Your chaperone watches nearby. She doesn't interfere. Yet. Another gentleman requests a later waltz. A dangerous choice. Waltzes involve close contact, very close by Victorian standards. So close that when they were first introduced, some critics called them morally corrupt, as if dancing spirited away innocence like an overly rhythmic demon. Still, waltzes are now widely accepted as long as you follow every rule. You glance at your chaperone. She gives a small nod. Approval. You allow the gentleman to sign his name. The orchestra begins, and dancers flow onto the floor with elegant precision. You join the pattern, careful to maintain posture so perfect it could double as scaffolding. Your partner offers his arm gloved, of course. Bare hands are far too scandalous and leads you into the figures of the dance. Every step must be measured, every turn calculated. Victorian dance is a less spontaneous movement and more physics problem. You follow the pattern. Forward, right, turn, glide, step back, turn again. The choreography looks effortless. It is not effortless. A quirky tidbit floats in. Dance cards became so popular that some women saved them as keepsakes, creating entire albums of social engagements, Victorian scrapbooks of potential husbands and regrettable partners. Some cards even had miniature pencils attached, so ladies could politely decline, forgetful men who asked twice. You glide through the next turn, careful not to brush skirts too loudly. Rustling fabric suggests you're moving too vigorously, which suggests enthusiasm, which Victorian etiquette finds suspicious. Historians still argue whether dance cards functioned purely as organization tools or as coded emotional documents with secret meanings. Some say women filled them strategically. Others say they were romantic battlegrounds. Either way, you're now in the middle of one, heart beating a little faster than your corset officially allows. Your partner speaks of the decor, the music, the weather, safe topics. You respond with poise, smiling the soft, neutral smile required to avoid giving anyone, including him, the impression of excessive warmth. Your second light joke slips in as he missteps slightly, barely brushing your toe. Thankfully, Victorian shoes are small enough that even mistakes are politely tiny. As the dance ends, you curtsy. He bows. Neither of you shows breathlessness. Breathing is unladylike if audible. You step away and rejoin the cluster of ladies along the edge of the ballroom. The room hums with gossip, disguised as small talk. Who danced with whom? Who danced twice with whom? Who was denied a dance by whom? Who is trying to pretend they don't care that they were denied a dance? Victorian drama is quiet but relentless. Everything is subtle, whispered, layered with meaning. A young woman near you fans herself with enthusiasm. Too much enthusiasm. A matron scowls. Fan signals are powerful tools, opening, closing, fluttering, resting, all communicate messages from "I'm interested" to "please go away" to "my corset is murdering me." But excessive fanning implies excitement, and excitement implies lack of control. You hold your own fan properly. Half open, gentle angle, no frantic movement, a polite breeze, not a hurricane. Your dance partners come and go through the next hour, signing your card, escorting you through quadrilles, contra dances, polkas, and the occasional daring waltz. You manage each with elegance, maintaining your posture, your modesty, your smile, and the illusion of comfort. Your third light joke meanders in as you complete another glide. Between the corset, the shoes, and the social rules, you're essentially dancing while wrapped in bubble wrap. As the night continues, you begin to feel the fatigue beneath the etiquette, the pressure in your ribs, the ache in your shoulders, the subtle dizziness of heat and perfume. No one admits exhaustion, it's unladylike, but you see the faint strain behind the smiles of other women. Victorian elegance comes at a cost, paid quietly, invisibly, constantly. Then, at last, the orchestra pauses. The host announces a brief interlude for refreshments. The room exhales as one. But there's no true rest tonight. Not yet, because after the dance, there's the duty every proper Victorian woman must master. The art of running a household while appearing not to run anything at all. You slip out of the ballroom, swirl, and into the quieter, gently lit sitting room, where refreshments await, lemon punch, tea cakes, biscuits that crumble if you look at them wrong. The air feels cooler here, your lungs grateful for a break from the heat of dancing, and the unspoken emotional calculus of partner selection. But there's no true rest for you tonight, because after the music pauses, the next ritual rises in its place like a duty-bound ghost. The invisible, impossibly delicate art of Victorian household management. It's a responsibility you perform every day, yet you must pretend you're not performing it at all. A proper Victorian woman keeps her home immaculate through a system of quiet supervision, strategic politeness, and constant emotional multitasking, all while appearing effortless, serene, and impossibly gracious. A mainstream historical fact settles into your mind. Victorian women were considered the moral center of the household, responsible for overseeing servants, maintaining respectability, organizing meals, guiding social engagements, and upholding every unwritten rule of domestic perfection. But, and here's the twist, they were not supposed to look like they were managing any of it. You take a sip of punch and feel the familiar weight of this unspoken duty. Your first light joke slips in, soft as lace. You basically run a small, etiquette-obsessed empire, but no one is allowed to admit you're in charge. When you return home later that night, the house is still awake, lamps glowing, servants moving quietly, the faint smell of laundry starch in the air. The evening's social rituals haven't ended, they've simply shifted locations. You hand your gloves to the maid, thanking her gently. Victorian etiquette demands politeness towards servants, but also distance. Too warm, and you look theatrical. Too cold, and you look cruel. The correct tone is calm gratitude without emotional intimacy, somewhere between "thank you," "sincerely," and "please don't perceive me too deeply." The parlour needs tidying after the pre-ball tea you hosted. You walk through the room with practiced grace, making sure every cushion is in place, every porcelain figurine unchipped, every lamp trimmed properly. You don't do the labour yourself, not because you can't, but because Victorian society insists a lady must not be seen performing heavy domestic tasks. Instead, you gently instruct the maids, offering soft direction that must never cross into the territory of sharpness. A quirky tidbit rises. Etiquette books warned women never to command servants directly. Instead, they were to suggest, indicate, or request, using phrasing so gentle it barely counted as instruction at all. Perhaps the tea tray might be moved nearer the window. Translation: move the tea tray. Now, historians still argue whether these rules reflected reality or merely the idealized world of upper-class propriety. In many homes, especially middle-class ones, women did plenty of hands-on work. But in houses like yours, everything must appear painted in layers of delicate, polite illusion. You move through the dining room next, noting what needs polishing, what needs dusting, what needs to be quietly handled before breakfast. Running a Victorian household is like conducting an orchestra, where half the instruments refuse to admit they make noise. You examine the calling cards left earlier in the day, stacked neatly on a silver tray. These cards hold political meaning. Who visited? Who visited first? Who visited back? Who visited late? Shonk. Who visited uninvited? Worse. Who didn't visit at all? Catastrophic. Victorian social life is basically a strategic board game played with tiny embossed rectangles. You sort the cards, deciding which ones require return visits, which ones signal friendship, and which ones signal a subtle social drift you must either correct or quietly accept. Your second light joke drifts in. You're managing relationships with more precision than a modern CEO reading performance analytics. Next, you check the pantry ledger. You must ensure the household supplies remain balanced. Tea, plentiful. Sugar, rationed. Soap, adequate. Coal, dwindling. Candles, mysteriously disappearing faster than reasonable. You make notes small, discreet, ladylike, so the house steward can act accordingly. Victorian houses run on a delicate mix of planning, politeness, and the hope that no one lights 4 candles at once. You pass the servants' staircase and hear the low murmur of evening duties. The etiquette books insist a lady should not intrude too far into the servants' domain, it blurs the lines. Still, you pause long enough to acknowledge their work. A nod, a soft word of thanks. Never too enthusiastic, never too familiar. Now comes the emotional labor, the invisible strain society pretends doesn't exist. You mentally review the entire day. Who you spoke to, whether your tone was correct, whether anyone at dinner judged your fork usage, whether your dance partners seemed appropriately interested but not too interested. Whether Mrs. Ellingham is about to start rumours about your brief sidewalk encounter, whether your posture betrayed fatigue, whether your parasol tilt suggested anything suspicious. Victorian womanhood requires constant self-monitoring, like living inside a morality mirror maze. Your third light joke whispers as you pick up a candle snuffer. Your daily workload rivals that of a stage manager, diplomat, and hostess, all while pretending you're just keeping house. Finally, as the hour grows late, you walk through the house one last time, extinguishing lamps, closing shutters, ensuring the front door is locked according to etiquette quietly, without fuss, without visible irritation. Each action is small, precise, graceful. No one will write books about the quiet endurance behind these rituals. No one will praise the balancing act. No one will count the mental strain. But you feel it. And as you take the last lamp in hand, its flame wavering in the dim hall, you realize the Victorian household runs on two things: servants' labour and your invisibly orchestrated command. You climb the stairs slow, composed, elegant still because the day isn't finished. Tomorrow morning, church awaits. And Victorian church etiquette is its own magnificent storm of judgment. You wake the next morning before the sun has fully decided whether it wants to shine early enough that the floor is still cold and the house seems to hold its breath. Today is Sunday, which means no leisurely strolls, no parasol decisions, no ballroom negotiations. Instead, you must prepare for the single most judgment-heavy ritual in the Victorian weekly cycle: church. Victorian society doesn't merely attend church, it performs church. You begin your morning with the familiar sequence of dressing: corset, chemise, petticoats, bustle, gown. Only this time everything must be more modest, more subdued, more buttoned, more correct. A mainstream historical fact rises to the front of your mind as you fasten the last hook. Church attendance in the Victorian era was not only a religious obligation, but a social showcase, one of the most important weekly opportunities to demonstrate respectability. Your first light joke whispers as you adjust your bonnet ribbon. Church is basically the Victorian Met Gala, except no one is allowed to look like they're trying. You choose a gown in muted colours, soft grey or lavender, because anything too bright inspires whispers of vanity. Your bonnet is tied carefully, the bow must be symmetrical, the veil falls just right. Gloves are worn from the moment you step out the door. Everything must suggest devotion, humility, and impeccable self-control. You enter the church with your family, joining the steady stream of equally polished worshippers, each pretending they aren't glancing sideways at everyone else's outfits. But the glances are real. They always are. And then comes the most treacherous part of all: pew placement. A quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some Victorian churches had unofficial pew territories, where families sat in the same seat for generations, even though the pews weren't actually assigned. Sit in the wrong place, and you might ignite a full-blown social feud conducted entirely through icy expressions and overly polite coughs. Your family's seat is halfway down the left aisle, a place of modest respectability. Not too close to the front, pretentious. Not too far back, lazy. Not in the middle, reserved for prominent family. You sit with perfect posture, arranging your skirts so they don't rustle. Rustling suggests agitation. Agitation suggests spiritual unrest. Spiritual unrest suggests all sorts of unacceptable things. The congregation settles. The air thickens with incense and suppressed judgment. Historians still argue whether Victorian church strictness was universally enforced, or if it mainly flourished among the middle and upper classes who used religion as a form of social theatre. Some scholars say working-class families were more relaxed. Others insist the era was soaked in moral scrutiny from top to bottom. As the minister begins, you hold your prayer book just so open, but not too flat. You must appear devout but not dramatic, attentive but not intense, reflective but not gloomy. Even your eyelid angle is part of the performance. Your second light joke slips in gently. You're praying with all the energy of someone trying not to make eye contact during a school presentation. The sermon drifts through topics of virtue, humility, charity, and discipline. All subjects Victorian society believes you should embody flawlessly. The minister's voice echoes against the stone walls. From somewhere, behind you, a child coughs. From somewhere, 2 rows ahead, an older woman shifts just enough to remind everyone she is displeased by something or other. Midway through the sermon, another subtle rule emerges. Women must not appear distracted. You cannot look around, cannot examine the stained glass windows for too long, cannot let your gaze wander to the hats in the row ahead. You must absorb the sermon with polite, unobtrusive focus, even if the church is warm, your corset is tight, and your bonnet feels like a polite birdcage strapped to your skull. When it's time to sing, you open your hymnal. But here again is a rule. Sing, but softly. Victorian ladies do not belt hymns. Loud singing is masculine, indelicate, and attention-seeking. You sing just enough to be heard by the people beside you no further. Finally, the service ends. Everyone stands, smoothing skirts and adjusting gloves. But the ritual isn't over. Now comes the exit, which is its own performance. Victorian church exits are slow-moving rivers of polite nods, measured steps, and strategic greetings. Your third light joke drifts forward as you move down the aisle. The church exit is like a Victorian red carpet. Everyone pretends not to judge your walk, but they definitely are. You greet the minister. You greet Mrs. Thorpe, who always has something to say about someone's niece. You greet the newlyweds, still glowing with a carefully moderated level of joy. And then you greet Mrs. Ellingham, your courtship chaperone from earlier, who gives you a cryptic smile that could mean anything from "lovely to see you" to "I spotted your interaction with that gentleman and will absolutely be discussing it later." You walk out into the daylight again, keeping your bonnet angled just right, your gloves perfectly fitted, your step measured and modest. The churchyard becomes a social arena full of greetings, compliments, and discreet family inspections. And just when I think the performance is over, you remember, Sunday isn't a day of rest. Not in Victorian society, because after church comes shopping, and shopping has rules just as unforgiving. You leave the churchyard with the same composed dignity you entered, with soft steps, lowered gaze, gentle nods, and follow your family down the cobblestone street. The morning's rituals are complete, but the Victorian day is still young, and after church comes the next socially loaded performance: shopping. Shopping today isn't fun, it isn't indulgent, it isn't even practical. It's a public test, an exam in etiquette, posture, voice control, and polite restraint. To Victorian society, shopping is not about purchasing items. It's about demonstrating that you can enter public spaces without causing chaos. A mainstream historical fact taps at your memory like a shop bell above the door. Victorian shopping districts became increasingly popular in the mid-19th century, but women were expected to navigate them with strict decorum, never rushing, never bargaining too aggressively, and never drawing attention. You step onto the bustling high street, your gloves crisp, your bonnet poised, your parasol angled with the same neutral grace you practiced yesterday. Every storefront shines with glass polished to a holy glow. Behind each window sits an assortment of respectable items: ribbons, stationery, lace, sensible hats, extremely judgmental umbrellas. Your first light joke arrives as you begin browsing. Victorian shopping is basically retail meditation, with extra steps and fewer emotions allowed. You enter the milliner's shop first. Inside, the air smells faintly of starch, violets, and fragile social expectations. The shopgirl greets you with a polite, carefully pitched, "Good morning." You return the greeting softly. A lady's voice in public must be gentle, never carrying across the room. Loud female voices are considered unrefined. Your vocal cords must behave as elegantly as your gloves. You examine a row of ribbons, but even this is an etiquette dance. Too much touching? Indecent. Too little touching? Suggests ignorance. You lightly, very lightly, lift the end of a ribbon, feeling its texture in just the right way to signal that you are interested but not enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is a luxury. Victorian women are allowed only in private, and only when no one is listening. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some etiquette manuals warned women not to haggle too boldly, as bargaining was considered too forward, yet they must also not accept prices too quickly, because that signaled gullibility. Victorian women walked a tightrope even at the cash counter. You ask the shopgirl about a modest lilac bonnet trim. Your tone must be gentle, your sentences politely circular. Would you happen to have? I was wondering whether. It might be lovely if. Direct language is for men and market vendors. You, meanwhile, must phrase your needs like soft riddles. Next, you step into the stationery shop. Here, the rules intensify. Paper is serious business. This is where calling cards, invitations, and social announcements are forged tiny rectangles that can elevate your status or ruin your season. Historians still argue whether the stricter shopping rules were actually followed by most women, or were mainly an idealized upper-middle-class fantasy. Many working-class women shopped quickly, loudly, and practically. But in the world you inhabit, silence and poise are the currency. You select a small bundle of writing paper, but before purchasing, you make one of the most dangerous moves in the Victorian shopping arena. You ask a question. Not a bold one, boldness is forbidden, but a gentle inquiry about the weight of the paper. The shopkeeper approves. Asking about quality shows refinement. Asking about price too eagerly shows thriftiness, which the upper classes avoid like improper table settings. Your second light, joke whispers in. You're trying to buy envelopes without revealing that you are, in fact, a person with preferences. After the stationery shop comes the dry goods shop. This one is trickier. More customers, more noise, unacceptable, more opportunities to accidentally brush a sleeve against another person. Scandalous. You navigate the aisles with the precision of a Victorian ninja, skirts tucked neatly, gaze lowered politely, hands folded or gloved at all times. Then, inevitably, it happens. A man bumps the edge of your parasol. Not hard, not rude, just enough to jostle the air. He apologizes immediately, quite loudly. You respond with the correct etiquette. A soft incline of the head. No verbal acknowledgement unless absolutely necessary. Women must not appear startled, irritated, or flustered. You glide away as though bump interference were beneath your concern. Your shopping continues into the grocer's, where your maid discreetly stands ready to carry anything you select. You, however, may not carry parcels publicly. Victorian women must float, unencumbered, like decorative swans. Carrying one's own packages, unless small and symbolically light, is considered almost as shocking as speaking about one's income. Your third light joke drifts in like a polite whisper. Victorian shopping rule has shown. Buy whatever you need, as long as you don't look like you actually need it. Finally, your list is complete. Your gloves remain spotless. Your posture remains pristine. Your voice remains soft. Your steps quiet. Your dignity intact. You exit the high street with your chin at its proper angle, parasol balanced, expression serene. Behind you, the shops fade back into their polished stillness. You've survived the merciless etiquette gauntlet of Victorian commerce. But the day isn't over. You still have to get home safely. And in Victorian society, public transportation is a performance with even stranger rules than shopping. You leave the bustle of the high street with parcels discreetly handled by your maid, parasol angled at its polite, socially neutral degree, and your posture as refined as a marble statue. You've survived shopping barely, but now comes the ordeal. Victorian women dreaded even more than ribbon selection or accidental parasol collisions, public transportation. Nothing reveals your manners or threatens them quite like squeezing yourself, your skirts, your dignity, and your parasol into a moving vehicle designed by men who clearly never wore a bustle. A mainstream historical fact whispers as you approach the road. By the mid-19th century, omnibuses and hansom cabs were the most common forms of transport for city women, but the etiquette surrounding them was famously complex, contradictory, and nearly impossible to master. You stand at the edge of the street as an omnibus rattles toward you, wheels clattering like a skeletal drum roll. Your maid flags it down, you must not wave in. Public, waving is exuberant, and exuberance is practically a misdemeanor. The omnibus shudders to a stop, and you prepare for your first challenge. Boarding. Victorian buses do not have steps designed for corsets, bustles, or moral dignity. You must step up with tiny, carefully contained motions, lifting your skirt just enough to avoid tripping but not enough to reveal an ankle. An exposed ankle is, well, practically a scandalous novella. Your first light joke drifts in as you attempt the impossible maneuver. You're boarding this bus like someone trying not to alert a sleeping dragon living in her skirt. Inside, the omnibus is a narrow wooden box filled with strangers, arranged according to mysterious Victorian logic. Women sit on the left, men on the right, unless the bus is crowded, in which case you must pretend not to notice that everyone is breaking half the rules. You take a seat, but here is the second challenge. Skirt compression. Your layered gown expands like a decorative parachute, so you must gently, discreetly compress it enough to fit, without using force, or heaven forbid, making rustling noises. You manage it, sitting perched on the edge of the bench like a very polite bird. Your maid sits nearby. A man across from you nods politely. You lower your gaze. The safe, modest, Victorian, non-verbal equivalent of, "Hello, I acknowledge that you exist, but let's not make a big deal out of it." Now, the omnibus lurches forward, and Victorian etiquette insists on the following. Absolutely no grabbing the handrails too quickly, unladylike. No sliding across the bench suggests instability, physical or moral. No leaning sideways, your corset forbids it anyway. No appearing startled when the vehicle hits a pothole the size of a baptismal font. Historians still argue whether anyone actually followed these rules or whether real Victorian women clung to whatever prevented them from falling headfirst into a stranger's lap. Some scholars claim the etiquette books exaggerated impossibly ideal behavior. Others believe many women internalized these expectations deeply enough to maintain them under any circumstances. Even on a violently swaying omnibus, you try to remain serene as the vehicle rattles like a haunted wardrobe. Your parasol is closed and resting against your shoulder, at the precise angle that does not poke anyone in the ribs. Your gloved hands rest in your lap folded, idle, elegant. And then, of course, someone coughs. A man 3 seats away lifts his handkerchief and coughs discreetly. No one acknowledges it, because acknowledging other people's bodily functions is forbidden. You stare out the window, imagining the fresh air like a distant dream. Next comes your third challenge. Eye contact regulation. Victorian etiquette forbids. Staring, gazing, long glances, inadvertent admiration, quick glances that look like long glances that pretend to be quick glances. You fix your gaze on the passing shop signs with the steady intensity of someone pretending the outside world is infinitely interesting. Your second light joke slips into your thoughts. Forbidden eye contact rules mean you basically ride the bus like a guilty Victorian owl. A sudden jolt sends the passengers swaying. You stiffen your spine immediately. Victorian etiquette warns that women must avoid falling against anyone, especially men, at all costs. A single unintended bump could ignite gossip, duels, marriage rumors, and possibly fainting couches. You correct yourself gracefully, pretending the jolt didn't happen. Your next challenge arrives in the form of a free seat near the door. A man rises to let you move closer to exit first. According to the rules, you must acknowledge the gesture with a soft thank you, but only a soft one. Loud thanking is as inappropriate as loud anything. You move carefully, skirts gathered with the delicacy of someone handling a live candle. You sit again, preparing for the final trial, exiting without display. The omnibus stops. You stand with perfect posture, grasp the handle lightly, but not desperately. Lift your skirts just enough to avoid disaster, and step down, slowly. Too fast prompts whispers of eagerness. Too slow looks dramatic. The goal is ethereal neutrality. You step down. Success. As you walk along the pavement, you realize the entire journey has been a delicate ballet of restraint, awareness, and controlled breathing, basically the same as the rest of Victorian life. Your third light joke arrives with your steady exhale. You've just survived public transport using 90% etiquette and only 10% balance. But before you can relax, the next ordeal appears ahead, not physical, but emotional. Because Victorian women receive attention they did not ask for, and the etiquette rules for handling it are some of the strangest, most rigid, and most quietly cruel of all. You continue your walk home. Parasol, neatly angled, steps soft and measured, posture referencing every etiquette book ever written. You've survived shopping, church, transportation, and approximately 14 opportunities for social disaster. But Victorian life loves saving its most uncomfortable challenges for when you're already tired. Unwanted attention. And not the modern kind where someone shouts across a street, though that certainly existed, but the uniquely Victorian mixture of rudeness, intrusion, judgment, and coded harassment that women were expected to absorb like well-bred sponges. A mainstream historical fact rises, and it's not a comforting one. Victorian women were taught that the burden of maintaining public decorum lay almost entirely on their own shoulders, even when confronted with inappropriate or aggressive behavior. In other words, if someone else behaves badly, you must behave better. You walk along the curb, gliding as instructed, when the first test appears. A pair of young men, well-dressed, clearly bored, slow their pace as you pass. They don't say anything improper, not exactly, but they exchange glances, raise their hats a little too charmingly, and smile in a way that says, "We are acknowledging your existence more than society approves." Your first light joke arrives with a sigh. You're basically being flirted with using Victorian Wi-Fi weak signal, too many rules, unstable connection. Your etiquette training kicks in immediately. You do not speed up. You do not slow down. You do not meet their eyes. You do not frown. 2. Confrontational. You do not smile. Encouraging. You maintain a perfect, emotionless, forward glide. Because the Victorian rule is as frustrating as it is clear. A lady must act as though the attention simply does not exist. Historians still debate whether Victorian women always obeyed this rule. Some argue that private diaries reveal anger, sarcasm, and even boldness behind closed doors. Women rolled their eyes, snapped back, or vented endlessly. But publicly? Almost no one dared to break the facade. You keep walking, but the second hazard arrives. A man leaning against a lamppost, hat tipped too low, gaze lingering too long. This is not polite admiration. This is the Victorian equivalent of the kind of stare that makes your spine stiffen. Your maid steps slightly closer, her presence a protective barrier. Victorian etiquette says that your defense must be subtle, quiet, and unprovocative. Shift slightly away. Keep your chin neutral. Pretend you do not feel the stare burning holes through your parasol. Maintain your dignity at all costs. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Victorian women were sometimes advised to carry smelling salts or vinaigrettes not only for fainting, but also as a socially acceptable reason to cover their noses and subtly shield their faces from unwanted male attention. You wish you had yours right now. The man tilts his head as you pass. You offer no reaction, not even a flinch. Reacting grants him power. Ignoring him reminds him that you are not available for his entertainment. Your maid gives a quiet, controlled clearing of her throat, just loud enough to signal, "We are respectable, and you should back off." The man looks away. Victory. But the third test is more complicated. You reach a busy intersection, where a policeman stands directing foot traffic. Policemen are allowed to interact with women politely, formally, and with restraint. However, some had a reputation for inserting commentary into their duties. And today, this one does just that. He gestures for you to cross, offering a compliment disguised as courtesy. "Mind the puddle there. Miss don't want such a fine dress splashed. It's harmless. It's polite. It's also socially inappropriate." The Victorian rulebook is clear. A lady must not reward unsolicited compliments with warmth, but she must not appear cold. A soft nod is correct. A verbal response is too encouraging. A smile is dangerous. Ignoring him entirely is rude. So you give a tiny, carefully controlled incline of the head, the same nod you might offer a painting being dusted. Your second light joke slips in quietly. You're navigating these interactions like a diplomat negotiating tea-time ceasefires. You cross the street, safely, elegantly, exhaustingly. But the final and most dreaded kind of unwanted attention arrives just before you reach home. Street commentary. A group of factory boys, barely older than children, shout something teasing in your direction. Not obscene, not terrible, just loud enough to be embarrassing. They're not trying to harass you, they're trying to entertain themselves. You are simply the nearest object. Your maid stiffens, ready to scold them. But Victorian etiquette insists that ladies must not engage in public conflict. So you do the correct thing. You walk on as though you truly, genuinely did not hear to them. It's frustrating. It's unfair. It's exhausting. But it's the rule. Historians still argue whether these rigid expectations protected women or trapped them. Some say the restraint gave women dignity in a hostile world. Others say it silenced them. Both arguments have weight, and the truth probably lived somewhere between propriety and quiet exhaustion. Your third light joke sighs through your mind as you approach your gate. Victorian self-defense strategy. Look unbothered until the universe gives up. Finally, blessedly, you reach your door. Your maid knocks. You step inside, leaving the public arena behind. But rest won't come yet, because now comes the ritual your entire social world depends on. Hosting afternoon tea, an event so delicate that even the biscuits have etiquette. You barely have time to remove your bonnet before the maid reminds you ever so gently, ever so apologetically, that the clock is drifting toward late afternoon. And in the Victorian world, that means one thing: hosting afternoon tea. If dinner is a battlefield, and calling hours are a diplomatic summit, afternoon tea is a delicate balancing act performed on fine china. It's the supreme test of composure, subtlety, hospitality, and the ability to pour liquid without causing a scandal. You return to the sitting room, your sitting room where the soft clink of porcelain and the faint smell of fresh scones linger in the air. Everything must be arranged perfectly. Not extravagantly, that would be vulgar. Not too simply, that would be negligent. The correct level of effort is, as always, just enough to suggest refinement, but not enough to suggest you tried. A mainstream historical fact surfaces like steam rising from the teapot. Tea in the Victorian era wasn't merely a beverage. It was a ritual of class, femininity, and hospitality, treated with near religious reverence. A woman who served tea properly was considered well-bred. A woman who served it poorly risked becoming drawing-room gossip. Your first light joke drifts in as you adjust a plate of tiny sandwiches. Victorian tea is less about the tea and more about proving you can handle a teaspoon without moral collapse. You take your seat at the head of the tea table, your role, your domain, your quiet throne. The lace tablecloth is crisp, the cups match, the teaspoons gleam. A plate of seed cake rests nearby, looking innocent but ready to betray you if you cut it too generously. The first guest arrives. Mrs. Kingsley, who never misses tea and never misses an opportunity to mention her daughter's perfect embroidery. You greet her with serene warmth, the kind of warmth that suggests friendliness but not clinginess. A Victorian hostess must be engaging but never overly eager, a human hearthfire but never a bonfire. Next comes Miss Dalton, whose timid voice is only rivaled by the volume of her bonnet. Then Mrs. Morton, who has strong opinions about everything except etiquette. Then a cousin. Then a neighbour. They fill your sitting room with polite chatter and the faint rustle of skirts settling into chairs. Now the ritual begins. The pouring of the tea. The most treacherous of all domestic acts. You lift the teapot carefully, wrist angled just so. Too high, and you seem dramatic. Too low, and you seem careless. The spout must not drip. The stream must be steady. You must not clatter the lid. Church is safe. Gardens are safe. Anything involving opinions is dangerous. A quirky tidbit tickles your memory. Victorian tea manuals warned hostesses not to pour tea too quickly, because it suggested impatience, nor too slowly because it suggested condescension. Essentially, pour tea like someone who has achieved enlightenment. You offer sugar 2 lumps, never 3, and lemon slices but never milk and lemon together. That's a culinary villainy no Victorian would forgive. You pass the tea to your guests in clockwise order, always clockwise, always starting with the eldest or highest-ranking woman present. Your second light joke arrives softly. You're conducting tea service like a tiny porcelain-based symphony. The conversation finally begins to flow. Gossip trickles in like honey. Gentle, cautious, sweetened with euphemisms. Someone mentions a neighbour's cousin's sudden indisposition, illness. Someone else mentions an upcoming charity bazaar. Mrs. Morton's daughter has started taking piano lessons again, which everyone pretends to find delightful. But then comes the true challenge. Offering the biscuits. Biscuits may only be offered twice. Offering 3 times implies desperation. Offering once implies improper restraint. You pick up the plate, present it with modest grace, and let each woman take exactly 1. Taking 2 biscuits is frowned upon, unless you are elderly, ill, or spectacularly bold. You notice Miss Dalton hesitating. You encourage her with a soft smile, just the right amount of coaxing. She takes the smallest biscuit, naturally. Next comes the gentle, dreaded question that every hostess must answer flawlessly. Are these scones homemade? If they are homemade, you must answer modestly. Oh, they're simple things. If they are not homemade, you must remain vague, redirecting attention back to your guests' enjoyment. Historians still argue whether these elaborate rituals were truly followed in everyday homes or whether etiquette books exaggerated the performance. Many scholars believe middle-class women followed the rules earnestly, while wealthier women enjoyed bending them subtly. Either way, tea remains a cornerstone of Victorian femininity. You listen attentively, nod thoughtfully, speak just enough to guide the conversation without dominating it. A good hostess creates warmth, not heat. Your third light joke arrives as you refill a teacup. You're smiling so politely your cheeks deserve their own corsets. At last, the conversation wanes, the cups empty, and the guests begin to rise. Each thanks you with the same delicate, almost whispered gratitude. You escort them to the door, never rushing, never fawning. They drift away down the street like a procession of pastel-coloured ghosts. When the final guest is gone, you exhale for the first time in an hour. The teapot is half full. The biscuits are mostly intact. The tablecloth has survived. Your social standing remains secure. But your day isn't over, because now comes the most glamorous, exhausting ritual of all, preparing for the evening transformation, where a Victorian woman must become an artwork, polished, sculpted, and ready to be seen. The sun begins its slow descent, the sky shifting from pale afternoon blue to the soft, hazy gold every Victorian painter adored. Afternoon tea is finished. Your guests have drifted home like polite shadows, and the house settles into a hush just loud enough for you to hear your own pulse again. But there is no true rest, because now begins one of the most elaborate, time-consuming, etiquette-heavy rituals of the entire Victorian day: the evening transformation. If morning dressing is about modesty, and daytime dressing is about decorum, evening dressing is about appearing effortlessly, luminous, refined, elegant, sculpted, shimmering, but never too anything. Victorian beauty thrives on precision. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind as your maid prepares your wardrobe. Evening wear for Victorian women often involved low necklines, elaborate hairstyles, multiple jewelry pieces, and fine fabrics, but all regulated by strict codes of propriety. Yes, you are allowed to be, a little glamorous, but only within boundaries drawn by people who have very strong opinions about lace. Your first light joke rises as your maid unfastens your day bodice. Victorian women changed outfits so often, you'd think they were sponsored by their own wardrobes. Your maid helps you step out of your afternoon gown, careful not to disturb your corset because that stays on. Your ribs accept their fate with quiet resignation. Next comes the evening chemisette, less coverage, more elegance. Then the layers begin again. Evening petticoat, underskirt, overskirt. The bustle adjusted higher for evening drama. The gown silk or satin, soft as whispered gossip. Tonight's gown is pale ivory with a subtle sheen, the colour chosen to reflect candlelight in a way that suggests angelic composure, rather than, "I've been balancing etiquette on my spine since dawn." Your maid cinches the back with small, intricate hooks. You catch your reflection in the mirror. Your silhouette glides between ethereal and structurally impossible. Victorian fashion is equal parts beauty and engineering. Now comes hair, the hair. Victorian hairstyles are feats of architecture, requiring hot irons, pins, hundreds, possibly thousands, combs, oils scented with rose, lavender, or orange blossom, and a level of patience bordering on sainthood. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian woman truly styled her hair this elaborately daily, or whether many saved these towering masterpieces for major events. Some scholars suggest real women often used hairpieces to fake volume, sparing themselves endless arm fatigue. Your maid gathers your hair into soft curls pinned upward, just loose enough to look natural, just tight enough not to collapse during the evening. A small cluster of artificial flowers is added near your temple. Nothing too flashy, because etiquette warns against ornamentation that competes with one's betters. Your jewelry comes next. A delicate necklace, matching earrings, perhaps a bracelet, but only if it suits the gown. No tiaras unless you are married, aristocratic, or hosting something monumental. Victorians love rules about who may wear what. Your maid places a simple pearl necklace around your throat, timeless, modest, luminous. Your second light joke hums in your mind. You're wearing so many small accessories it feels like assembling a socially acceptable battle armor set. Now comes the most important part, the evening gloves. Longer than daytime gloves, reaching nearly to the elbow, these gloves are immaculate white symbolic purity stitched in expensive fabric. You slide your arms into them with measured grace. Removing them later will require another chapter of etiquette, but that's future you's problem. You take a slow step back from the mirror. You look like a woman straight out of a painting, a living composition of silk, posture, and restraint. But there's still one last preparation. Your evening fan. Fans aren't accessories tonight, they're communication devices. You take yours, a delicate thing painted with tiny flowers. You test the motions. Fully open equals bold, rarely acceptable. Half open equals engaged. Touching the cheek equals flirtation. Hiding behind it equals modesty. Snapping it shut equals disapproval, scandalous if used too. Your maid gives a small approving nod. You've mastered the basics. Now the house stirs again. Footsteps in the hall, faint chatter, the rustle of evening fabrics. Guests are arriving. Candles are being lit. The drawing room glows with warm gold and soft shadow. You glide down the stairs carefully, because your evening gown has a small train, and tripping in front of guests is a catastrophe Victorian society might discuss for 3 generations. Your third light joke floats in as you reach the landing. You're dressed like a celestial being, but walking like someone trying not to. Betray that their dress weighs as much as a small library. You enter the drawing room. Every eye lifts. Every whisper softens. Your transformation is complete, but the night isn't over. Because after the transformation comes the final set of rules, the nighttime rituals of privacy, propriety, and quiet reflection that no Victorian woman could escape. Rules not for display, but for the self. And they are some of the strangest of all. The evening guests eventually drift home on soft carriage wheels, the candle flames sighing lower with each passing minute. You smile through every farewell, every handshake, every polite nod, keeping your posture perfect until the very last hat disappears beyond the lamplight. Only when the door finally closes quietly, gently, never with a slam, does the illusion of effortless elegance dissolve into the stillness of your home. Now begins the final ritual of the Victorian woman's day, the etiquette of bedtime, the ballroom glitter, the afternoon, tea smiles, the church postures, the omnibuses, the parasols, all of it falls away. But Victorian society still watches you with invisible rules. Even in the privacy of your bedroom, etiquette adds its last layer of expectation. You climb the stairs slowly, aware of every tired muscle. Your maid follows a few steps behind. Victorian propriety insists that you may not undress entirely alone. A mainstream historical fact rises into your thoughts. Victorian women often maintained specific evening routines, involving writing in journals, moral reflection, and restrained undressing sequences designed to preserve modesty, even in private. Your first light joke drifts in softly. Victorian bedtime feels like getting ready for sleep while hosting an invisible audience of judgmental ghosts. Once inside your room, your maid begins to unfasten the dozens of hooks down your back. You stand still, letting your evening gown slip away in a whisper of silk. Victorian etiquette never allows garments to be tossed aside. Everything must be folded, smoothed, or hung. Each movement a tiny ritual of care. You step out of your shoes dainty, narrow, instruments of elegance and minor destruction, and feel the shocking relief of letting your toes expand. Then come the gloves. You peel them off slowly, fingers sliding free like a symbolic release of everything you held back during the day. Your maid helps lift the jewelry from your neck and ears, each piece placed carefully into velvet-lined trays. No necklace is ever left out. It might tarnish. No earring is ever misplaced. It might signal disorder. Victorian life hates disorder almost as much as it hates visible ankles. Next comes the corset. The untying begins. Every loosened lace feels like a personal apology from history. You inhale deeply, deeper than you have in hours, feeling your lungs welcome the kind of oxygen rarely granted to Victorian women. Then comes the nightgown. Soft cotton, long sleeves, high collar. Ironically, the garment designed for sleep is the least comfortable of all. It's respectable, modest, entirely opaque. You slip into it without argument. Victorian etiquette still isn't done with you. Now comes your diary. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Victorian women were encouraged, sometimes instructed to keep nightly journals to examine their moral behavior, their temptations, their failings, and their successes in modesty. Self-surveillance disguised as reflection. You sit at your writing desk, quill in hand. The diary's pages smell faintly of lavender. You write in soft loops, whom you spoke with, whom you avoided, whether you smiled too warmly at the wrong gentleman, whether your posture slipped, whether you did good works, whether you had improper thoughts. These you phrase as vaguely as bar. Historians still debate how honest Victorian women truly were in their journals. Some poured out their real frustrations in coded language. Others performed a nightly pavord, the version of public decorum on the page. You, tonight, choose the middle ground, polite honesty. Enough truth to feel real. Enough restraint to feel safe. Your second light joke arrives as you blot the ink. Even your diary feels like it expects you to sit up straight. You close the journal gently. Everything in the Victorian night must be gentle. Loudness belongs to people who don't care what the neighbours think. Next comes the ritual washing. Hands, face, a little lavender water dabbed behind the ears. Always upward strokes, etiquette books claim downward strokes, encourage wrinkles, and wrinkles are social tragedies. You blow out the lamp on your vanity. A single candle remains lit beside your bed, flickering like a tired heartbeat. Your maid gives you a final polite curtsy before retreating for the night. The door closes without a click. And now you are alone, truly alone for the first time all day. You slide into bed, sheets cool, blankets heavier than they look. The room rests in quiet shadow. The air smells faintly of soap and candle smoke. But even here, the rules whisper. A lady must not toss or sprawl. A lady must not curl up ungracefully. A lady must sleep, composed. You lie still, staring at the soft glow on the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the house settling into sleep. Your third light joke rests gently in your mind. You've spent all day performing for society, and now you must perform for your own pillow. Your breath steadies. Your eyes grow heavy. The Victorian world finally loosens its grip, not fully, but enough to let you drift. And as you sink deeper into the quiet warmth of your bed, something unexpected happens. For the first time, without posture, without etiquette, without rules, you feel the soft, unstructured shape of yourself. The day slips behind you now, each moment drifting away like a lantern floating down a quiet river. The rustle of skirts, the clink of teacups, the soft choreography of smiles and steps, all of it grows distant, dimming at the edges like candlelight before sleep. You breathe out slowly, letting the weight of the Victorian world fall away, layer by layer, as gently as folded silk. There's no posture to hold anymore, no glances to monitor, no polite words waiting behind your teeth. Just the calm rhythm of your own breath, warm and steady, settling deeper into the quiet. Outside your window, the night air rests soft and unmoving. The world that once felt so heavy now feels suspended, hushed, harmless. Nothing demands anything from you now. Not your voice, not your grace, not your stillness. The rules fade, melt, dissolve into the dark like morning fog. The candle beside your bed flickers one last time, then steadies its soft glow, wrapping around you like a warm shawl. Your thoughts slow, smoothing themselves into long, gentle waves that drift through your mind without urgency. You feel your body soften, released from every corset, lace, and every careful gesture. Released even from the memory of them. In this quiet, there is finally space for your shoulders to lower, for your breath to deepen, for your thoughts to simply float. The day behind you becomes nothing more than a distant murmur. Even that murmur silences itself as your body grows heavier, comfort seeping into your limbs like warm tea filling a cup. You're safe. You're warm. You're finally allowed to rest. Let the last of your thoughts drift away and let sleep take its gentle place.